So what we're going to cover today is a bit of an overview of cloud computing, cloud services, and really try to give you some information so that as people within the not-for-profit sector, you can make an informed decision as you decide to adopt some of these services. So really the target audience that we're trying to aim for with this presentation, really it's about business managers. Alternately, if you are an IT professional, but you need to have a business type of discussion with your managers in your organisation, then this will also be an appropriate webinar for you. We're not going to jump into detailed technical discussions about EC2 versus the Azure platform and all these other technical issues. We're really going to try to give you information that will help you make a business-led decision. So what are the objectives? What are the things you can expect to get out of this session this morning? What we're going to cover is, in very plain language, help you define or understand or confirm your understanding of what cloud services are. We're also going to look at what are some of the real-world opportunities and benefits that using cloud services will bring to you as a part of the not-for-profit sector. And really some of the most important things from our perspective is try to give you some things to consider. So when we say issues, we don't mean reasons for you not to use cloud. What we're really saying, what we're trying to communicate there is things to think about in advance so that when you do adopt a cloud service, it's a successful experience for you. It's something that brings value and benefit to you and to the organisation that you're a part of. And then what we're going to do is wrap up our session this morning by presenting just some simple ways to entry into this space in using cloud services and how to go about things. So basically, when we talk about the cloud, what do we mean by that? Well, in very simple terms, some of the things that identify a cloud service are that you access it over the internet. The type of service you access can be ordered very rapidly, and it can be changed very rapidly. By that, what we mean is instead of having just 5 users accessing, say, a CRM system, you can add extra users on very quickly. Instead of storing 100 gig of data, you can maybe reduce that down to 50 very rapidly. There's not a very long or extended lead time needed to have changes happen. And then the other key thing that identifies a cloud service is the way that you pay for it. And instead of the traditional IT model, which is very CapEx intensive, you have to spend a lot of money up front to buy a lot of equipment. Cloud services really are a pay-as-you-go type of model. So those 3 characteristics are what make up a cloud service. What you'll often hear talked about, especially if you're dealing with technical people in your organisation or even dealing with cloud providers, you'll hear expressions like platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. That can all sound potentially a little bit confusing. What does all that mean in terms of cloud? Well, the traditional approach that you would have used, say for example you had a line of business system, say a CRM that you're using within your organisation, traditionally you'd have to go buy it and have someone install that for you. You may also typically use something like Microsoft Office and Exchange, and again that means you're buying software, having it installed, buying licensing, buying all the hardware that drives that business system and drives that service. When you talk about the cloud approach, what that looks like is that you're still using the same services, but now you're really subscribing to those kind of services, basically. So as CRM as the example, some of the very well-known CRM solutions that are provided via cloud, Salesforce, Microsoft have their CRM Dynamics offering on there, and many others as well. Office 365 for things like Exchange and all your Office products, and then there's quite a large array of providers that allow you to do even the very basic things of storing documents and files on a network directory. Instead of having that sitting in your office somewhere, that can be all consumed from the cloud. And again, it's something that you subscribe to. So that those things are really infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service sort of demystified. So what are some of the real world opportunities and benefits that you can expect to receive from using a cloud service? We're going to consider two very recent examples, and the examples we're going to look at are quite high profile tier 1 type of organisations. And now you might think, well, you know, I'm just a small to medium not-for-profit. How are the experiences that we're about to look at going to benefit me? But please stick with me, and we'll talk about what we can learn from these and how they can potentially apply to you no matter what size of organisation you may be a part of. So the first example is of Commonwealth Bank, and they have experienced impressive savings. So they, over a year now, have moved their development and testing environments out of the traditional model of where they used to buy all the hardware, have it sitting in a data centre they owned. They've changed that and had their development and test environments now all provided from a cloud service. And literally tens of millions of dollars have been saved by CBA through doing that. And the figures, again, are quite astounding. So looking at their IT budget, 75% of that spend traditionally used to go on just the iron that used to sit in their server room, all the hardware. Now that's reduced down to 26%. But the interesting thing, if you look at the commentary from the CIO at CBA or at Commonwealth, not only is it that initial saving that they've experienced, but just all the other add-ons of the energy costs, all the floor space, all those things that go along with ownership have also been saved. So that's a significant benefit. It can reduce the amount of CapEx that you spend. Let's have a look at another example. This one's from the City of Melbourne, and this is an interesting example because it highlights another aspect of the benefits that cloud services can bring to you. So the City of Melbourne traditionally run 4 major festivals, which if you're a visitor to Melbourne or you're in Melbourne yourself or Victoria, you'll be familiar with these. So Moomba, Spring Fashion Week, Melbourne Music Festival and New Year's Eve. And it was interesting that their most recent Moomba promotion, it was promoted so heavily, it was such a success that the website crashed, and it really was a bit of a dismal experience from the IT front. That really prompted the IT leadership in the City of Melbourne to investigate other options. And so now all of their premier websites are all hosted via a cloud provider. And so the interesting thing from the City of Melbourne is that for them, moving to the cloud, the big benefit they saw was the ability to very rapidly respond to a change in demand. And that's something that may be applicable to your organisation. If you run promotions or, for example, funding initiatives, and you move them online where you try to get the public to donate or support perhaps a program that you're running. The traditional model of having to buy all this infrastructure in advance, set it up, manage it, and hope that you've got enough horsepower there to satisfy all the users you're going to get. Using a cloud model, that pressure is relieved because that whole criteria, one of the basic criteria of cloud of being able to rapidly scale, is something that for the City of Melbourne, it's delivered great benefits for them. But the other thing also is that if you're a finance type of person within your organisation, you'll know that budgeting and forecasting is always a challenge. And what cloud services allow you to do, if your business fluctuates, has periods of peak demand where there's a lot more workers on your books or on your system, and then it drops off, cloud services are a way of potentially starting to match your costs of IT services along with that increased activity and potentially increased revenue. So that's a very quick snapshot of some of the potential opportunities and benefits. But the key thing is, what do you need to consider? What are some questions that really you need to ask before you move into cloud services in a serious way? We're going to start off by really looking at some of the basic elements. So for example, what's your connectivity like? So if you're a not-for-profit organisation out in regional Victoria or rural or Australia, not just Victoria, and you have very limited connectivity in terms of internet access, then really cloud services aren't going to be a good fit for you at the moment. Very simply, it relies on being able to access the internet. What about security? That's another hot topic. And by security, we're not talking about are cloud services secure, because the industry has worked extremely hard to make sure that they are. But what is important for you as business managers to think about is your own organisation. What are the different types of information that you have in your systems? Do you, or are you comfortable with the type of information you may be holding about customers? For example, if you have payment details, you'll need to think seriously about how do we store that information, how do we treat it? Is it going to be appropriate to hold something like that out in the cloud? So it's that element of security that we think it's important that organisations consider and think about in advance. If you're a not-for-profit and potentially you might be dealing with people in need, where maintaining their privacy is critical, even privacy of their name and address, things like that, that'll be another factor of security that you'll need to think through in advance, and that'll help you plan which service you choose to consume via a cloud or not. Data sovereignty is something that has received a lot of discussion about over the last few months. And by data sovereignty, what we mean is, ultimately, even though you're using a service over the internet, that's coming from a data centre that's physically sitting somewhere in the world. And up until only recently, most of the cloud data centres, most of the cloud providers were outside of Australia. And so that raised a lot of concerns for the government sector or for organisations that have close interactions with government agencies as their stakeholders about would they be able to access the data, would they be able to recover that information if it was held under the jurisdiction of another country. So that's something for you to think about, but that's thankfully, as time's gone on, that's becoming less of a challenge because even Amazon recently, you may have read the news, have opened a cloud data centre in Sydney, and the government's commissioning their own cloud centres. Even though they're aimed directly for the federal agencies or the Commonwealth agencies, we see a bit of a shift in that environment. But it's still something to think about. Record keeping. So this is something, again, if you're a not-for-profit, depending on the type of space you play in the not-for-profit sector, it's important to understand, well, what are your record-keeping obligations? Is it a challenge or going to be a challenge for you to comply with those if you're using a cloud service? So there are different questions that you can ask of perhaps your record people within your organisation, record management people, and there's quite clear guidance that's started to be provided by the different record agencies like the Public Record Office of Victoria, New South Wales State Record Office, about how to treat records for cloud-based services. And perhaps one of the big things that people often think about is, well, what will this mean on my existing IT support? So will it mean that I have a chance to reduce my support costs? Will they increase, or will they stay? Internal IT people have IT provided by an external third party. And so we encourage you to do a little bit of investigation about the true cost of ownership or the true cost of using a cloud service. So it will obviously be more than just $19.95 per user per month, depending on, that's just an example, depending on what you're using. But it's important to understand with a new service, it's still going to need to, it will still have to be administered by somebody. What will that administration overhead look like? Who's going to be able to carry it out for you? When you look at the examples of larger organisations, if you're a medium to large not-for-profit, it's highly likely that you'll be able to reduce some of your support costs in terms of dedicated system administrators. Because you have less physical hardware that needs to be managed, it's the opportunity to be able to deploy those resources to do more value-add activities for your organisation. And that's the experience that large organisations like Commonwealth have found. Commonwealth Bank that we mentioned earlier, they found they were able to, the CIO used the expression, they were able to move from being viewed as a cost centre to a real value provider, and it helped their technical people really look at how they could improve business functionality and business productivity. And then one of the final key things to consider or to look at is what the service level agreements for the cloud provider are. And this really becomes your contract. If you start adopting a cloud service, it becomes one of the key control tools you have in your commercial relationship with your cloud provider. So it's important to understand what that service level agreement contains, and beyond that, really think about, does what the cloud provider is offering, does that match what my business's needs are? So for example, if it's something like email and network storage that you're consuming from the cloud, are the uptimes suitable for you? If there's a disaster recovery window that needs to be performed by the cloud provider, it's important to look at all those things and then consult back with your business and to make sure that you have a comfortable relationship there. It's better to do that than obviously be faced with a situation where you have some kind of challenging circumstance that can't be met because of an outage. The other key thing to consider is this concept of onboarding and offboarding. In other words, rolling all of your services from previously sitting inside your own building to now being hosted out over the internet. What is that going to cost you to do? Dollars and time. But if you ever have the situation where you need to either bring that back internal or potentially change from one cloud provider to another one, what's involved in that? Is there any technical limitations where you may not be able, excuse me, where you may not be able to migrate all of your data, or you may not be able to maintain all of your functionality between one provider and another? There's some key elements that we would encourage all business owners to ask of their cloud providers. If you have potentially some IT providers who are trying to promote or sell these services, they're the types of questions that we'd encourage you to go into that asking, satisfy yourself, make sure that you will be getting the service that you need. So, how do we get started? Well, thankfully it's actually extremely simple. If you haven't had a chance to make use of the cloud service, there are a number of free trials where you can jump on and start to use a version of CRM. You could start to use a version of Office 365, just as a couple of examples. They're typically 30-day trial periods. And while you may not, say for example, you choose to use Office 365 and an email, some kind of issue that's going to make it a barrier for any of your business users to work with, or does it actually look and behave as you would expect it to? Obviously, there's a number of cloud providers, a number of sales partners that they have. They would be more than willing to obviously assist you and help you through that process. But there's also a role that Votar Partners is able to play in this whole environment. So we are staunchly vendor independent, but the things we can potentially assist organisations with in this area. If you're a larger organisation and you're approaching perhaps a big reinvestment period where you need to refresh your hardware, and you're thinking, well, that's a trigger to potentially, let's look at moving some of these things to the cloud, we can certainly assist in helping you develop a business case that will inform a decision or help you get approval. And we can also, going back to some of the commentary we mentioned about the service level agreement, we can certainly help organisations start to define what are your cloud-specific business requirements beyond I need to use email or use CRM. Is there anything significant there that's important to your business that needs to be satisfied? And we can also help you develop appropriate assessment and evaluation criteria. So our role is really to help you as businesses make an informed decision, get the best value out of any investment you make in technology. So thank you all so much for your time this morning. That's our quick introduction into cloud, what it is and how to get started with it. If you have any questions, please feel free. We're very happy to take those now.
Hi Bruno, we have a few questions here. First of all, Janine is asking, you were talking initially about savings on equipment, floor space, power, etc. For a small not-for-profit in a small office, would these savings be significant enough to shift to the cloud?
The reality is, if you're a small organisation, moving to the cloud will probably be cost neutral. It'll be about the same for you. But the other things that may help you make a decision beyond the pure dollars and cents is that you won't have to worry about backups. You won't have to worry about recovery in case of a disaster. You obviously will reduce the need to refresh that hardware as it ages. And your cost will move from a capital expenditure, which you depreciate, over to an operating cost of a set monthly fee. So that those things may come into the equation that you need to think about that may say, well, yes, even though we're not going to make massive savings, there's still other benefits that mean it's worthwhile moving to the cloud. And I'd encourage all of you, if you're not finance people, to just double check with your finance people in your organisation about would they have any challenges in moving from a CapEx model through to a operating expense model.
I thought I'd
just answers the question.
Yes, it does. I thought I'd just quickly flag to everyone that if you have any question, please feel free to type them in your question box, and I will facilitate and ask them through to Bruno one by one. The next question is from Shane. Shane is asking what ISP download speeds are required for cloud use, because you did talk about it needs to have a good internet connection.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question. What?
ISP download speeds are required for cloud use, because you did talk about how internet connection is really key in having cloud.
Yes, and look, I'd say as a minimum you would want to have a stable ADSL2 connection, but it all depends. It's hard to give you an exact answer. It all depends on the size of your workforce. In other words, how many people would be connecting and using that service, and also what kind of service you're accessing. So say, for example, you were accessing a line of business application, like something like CRM, and you had a call center of maybe 30, 40, or a couple of hundred people accessing that. You would obviously need a lot more than just an ADSL2 connection. So it's hard to give you an exact answer, but I am happy to send some reference information out to Shane afterwards if you're happy with that, and I can try to put together a bit of a matrix of some guidance on what would be a good fit for you, if that's of value.
Yep, that would be great. We'll send the contact later on. Janine is asking again, what types of files would you recommend are not to be stored in the cloud?
Typically anything that contains sensitive or personal information, going back to that point about security. So it's going to be different for each organisation. So the key things that most people worry about is the payment details, any kind of personal details. So that applies even to the big banks in Australia. So if you go back to the Commonwealth Bank example, they got all of their savings purely through their development and test environments, but they don't house anybody's payment details out there purely as just a security precaution. So I'd really encourage you to analyse your different types of information. If it's just generic documentation that you provide, maybe procedures, policies, or just sales collateral, or whatever it might be about your organisation that doesn't have client data in there, certainly that doesn't have payment data in there, you can be very comfortable in saving that out into a cloud environment and not be worried in the unlikely event of some kind of breach or hack that you're going to be exposed.
Great. Just a few questions here. If using cloud, what hardware or software will we ultimately need in our offices?
That's a great question. So today, most organisations run a hybrid environment. So they don't just sit in their office with a laptop and that's it. I should say, if your needs are extremely simple, you can actually just sit in your office with a laptop and a modem connecting up or a router connecting to the internet. If all you were consuming was email and you were saving some files on a network directory, then literally you could run everything from the cloud and just have the cloud. However, if you've got a little bit more of a complex function, so you say you might have a finance system, a payroll system, you might have a system that manages tenancy information, or maybe some grants management application, you might find that what you might have is your email service or some of your websites or something like that sitting out in the cloud. Internally, you might still have a server with all of your line of business information on there, your Active Directory server there where you're authenticating. Potentially, you may also have some kind of caching or acceleration server sitting on your premises. That would be for a more sophisticated environment where you've got more users accessing potentially some kind of cloud service. So again, it's difficult to give you an absolute exact answer because there's so many variables there, and that's why we'd encourage you to, as you start to either be approached by IT providers or you're starting to investigate yourself, these kind of questions are the exact ones to start to get very clear answers from your technical providers, and that will help you again get the true cost, help you build a true business case before you go ahead and make a decision.
Following from that, we have a few questions. If you can recommend some suggested cloud providers, maybe Australia-based or...
Oh, gosh. Yeah, well, look, Amazon's just opened their cloud centre here, and they're, you can look at all they're extremely transparent about their costs, about what you can do. You have Microsoft, and I think it's Telstra that are in partnership. Their cloud centre is based in Singapore with a failover in Hong Kong, but they have quite competitive offerings around Office 365. So the basic collaboration suite of your email, your Office products. You can have SharePoint all hosted online. You can have your enterprise social networking tools like Yammer. all hosted through cloud. So there's some of the reliable Tier 1 providers that are still offering quite competitive packages there.
And following from that, what about data protection and jurisdiction? Do they provide any hybrid cloud solution with backup solution in Australia?
That's a great question, and I don't know about Telstra and the Microsoft partnership. But that is an excellent question. So if that's a concern for you, that's one of the key things that as you deal with the technical providers, you should right up front flag and make sure that you're satisfied. My gut reaction is that they would definitely offer some kind of service, but you'd want to verify that.
So in the event that you wanted or had to change your cloud provider, how easy in terms of time and cost would that be?
That's another good question. It comes down to what services you're consuming from them. So obviously the more services, if you start to roll in line of business systems, beyond your messaging and collaboration, if you put line of business systems in there, if you have some custom applications that you're putting out into the cloud, if you're a larger organisation and you're making use of some of the cloud-based development services, then it's going to become a lot more complex to change from, say, the Amazon EC2 cloud and platform service over to the Windows Azure environment. There's going to need to be some refactoring of how your application, the API sets effectively that your application's talking to, for your transactions to still work, for your data to still be stored and retrieved and all those other things. But if your services are fairly basic and generic, then moving from one to the other isn't something that's going to be able to happen as quickly as saying, I need a new virtual machine and putting in the order and getting it run up. But it shouldn't be something that takes months or any kind of exercise like that.
So
that's why the SLA is quite key and making sure.
Yep. So can you give a rough estimate? That's okay. Can you give a rough estimate then how much a ballpark investment you need to put in to start moving to the cloud?
Oh gosh, well, it all depends on how. If you were, say, you were a very small not-for-profit or maybe a startup organisation, you had a handful of people, so 10 people, and you literally were running your business activities just using email, office productivity, storing things on the network, you could go for an extremely cheap and cheerful solution of using something like Gmail, but the corporate version. You could make use of something like Dropbox, which if you know how to register and do your member gets member, you can get quite generous data sizes, all for a very low subscription fee. So you've got that end of the spectrum of very cheap, cheerful, and still secure, through to a more corporate environment of something like $40 a month per user for email, Office 365, SharePoint, and some data storage. So the beauty of the cloud offerings, or that pay-as-you-go, is that you'll get a basic metric of a dollar rate per user per month that you can then just do some simple calculations yourself to give you a gut feel. So if you didn't have a lot of data to migrate, if you well, again, as I mentioned, starting up, your cost of entry is extremely low. I can't give you an exact figure because it's kind of how long is a piece of string, but hopefully what I've explained there gives you some idea of the scale of how easy it is to entry or how easy it is to get a bit of a cost of what you think it's going to be.
Yep, that's great. I think that gives a rough indication.
If anybody would like to get a bit, yeah, I was going to say if anybody would like some more specific information, I'm happy to. You're welcome to shoot me an email. I'm happy to do some research and send that back to you.
Great. Another question here. we would have to upgrade our server to provide remote access to staff. Would being in the cloud make this possible, and is it secure enough?
Is it secure enough? It's definitely secure. Would it allow you to do that? Absolutely. So if you say you had a lot of field-based workers that were connecting through something like a 4G modem or a 3G modem, the limitation is going to be whatever bandwidth they can get from their device or from their, say they all work from home in a virtual environment, wherever their connectivity is. But if you're dealing with one of the Tier 1 cloud providers, the limitation isn't on the provider end, it'll be on you as a client. So it's definitely, if all you're offering is potentially an email, a service and access to like a network directory, and all that is being served up via the cloud, then yes, that's an easy way to go.
There's a particular case here. She's just wondering if she's on the right track. So Deborah is asking, so Deborah is from a not-for-profit with a number of regional offices connecting to a server in the head office, and they're really seriously considering moving to the cloud because it's just mainly to give those regional offices a better and more reliable access to their document and client management systems. Just wanting to get your advice on if you think they're on the right track by doing that.
Yes, they should definitely consider it, but so given that they're looking at client management systems and document management, it becomes a little bit more of a complex decision-making process. So you first of all have to make sure that your current systems that you've talked about can be served up from a cloud environment. If that's the case, then that's fine, and if you're comfortable with the costs, then that's good. The other part to think about is, well, what is causing the connectivity issues at the moment? And if the connectivity issues are sitting at the client side, in other words, the people in your regional office, if that's where the bottleneck is, then that's still going to be the same bottleneck regardless of the fact that you've shifted all of the server-side information from your head office to a cloud environment. So I'd encourage you to try to get a little bit more data about what the point is that's causing the bottleneck and the challenges. If you know that, and if you know that the bandwidth that you're providing at head office is extremely low, and that's where everybody's having the problems with, then yeah, absolutely, sticking it out to the cloud will make it an awful lot easier. But if the problem is on the client side, then moving it to the cloud isn't necessarily going to fix that issue. It still might be a good decision to go to the cloud for other reasons, that hopefully you've built a bit of a business case around. So you need to really get as much data as you can that isolates the root cause of the problems today.
Raywin is asking if you have knowledge of events that have occurred where sensitive data might have been at risk, and what steps can be taken to reduce those risks.
Look, I'm not aware of any major security breach from a cloud provider per se. So if you are going to store more sensitive information out in the cloud, then obviously any kind of encryption you're able to do becomes the key. So whilst you'll have a secure environment out in the cloud, any encryption you're able to do, which can occur in your line of business system, can occur at the database layer, can occur at a number of other points. That is a way of really increasing the amount of protection and security you have. The other option, if, for example, the public cloud is a bit of a concern, if you are of the scale to create a community type of cloud, then that becomes an option where you still have all the cloud benefits, but a limited number of users access that infrastructure. But my suspicion that in the not-for-profit space, that you may not have the scale to make that actually work. So it's going to come down to encrypting as much as you can, as often as you can.
Just to let everyone know as well, we do have a fair bit of time left, about 15 minutes, and I have probably one to two questions left. So if anyone else have any pending questions that they come up with, please feel free to type them in the question box. Here's another question for you. In terms of the Exchange Cloud servers, do we pay for the amount of data or the number of users?
Both. So you pay per mailbox, so as opposed to a user, you pay for a mailbox per month. And so the implication of that is you may have 50 employees, Fred, Betty, Margaret, John, etc., at notforprofit.com. But you may also have something like admin at not-for-profit or donations at not-for-profit. Each of those mailboxes is what you pay for, and then you pay for a certain, included in that fee is a certain amount of storage. So you can increase the amount of storage per user, or per mailbox I should say, and that just kicks you over into a different pricing band. So you do pay for both.
With those solutions that you talked about, the cloud providers, etc., are they available in New Zealand as well? Do you know?
I'm not, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of cloud providers that have established data centres or hosting data centres in New Zealand. But again, I'm happy to do some quick research on that, but not off the top of my head. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Great. Is it? Hang on.
Simple Google. Yeah.
Sorry. Go on.
I was going to say, yeah, to the NZ question, I think even just jumping on and doing a simple Google of, public cloud providers hosted in NZ, and then if you get something, if there's something there, they should return a result straight away.
Yeah. Antonino is asking again, if it is shared drive only, how can they set up permissions and at which level?
You should be able to do that exactly as per how you would within your office environment. So, creating a user authentication type model, and then as you log in, but as you connect into the cloud, it authenticates, and then based on that permission structure that you've set up. So there's still some administration that has to be provided by somebody somewhere. So that might be someone in your organisation that does the administration. It might be a third, if you have IT provided by an external party, they would do that for you, but that permissions and directory structure can all be configured and maintained as if you were accessing a server sitting in your office.
A question from Tim. Would you be able to list the range of IT admin tasks that would still need to be undertaken by not-for-profit IT staff for applications held in the cloud?
It's pretty much everything that you would normally do except for applying the patches, running the backups, any of those kind of lower level hardware type related admin activities. But in terms of configuration of your business systems that sit on top of your server environment, configuration of your Active Directory and roles and security, configuration of all your Exchange. So all those things that that sysadmin people do today still has to happen, but they're doing that with a server that's sitting literally over the wire somewhere, as opposed to a server they could go and touch in their data center or their server room today. I hope that's not too broad for you, but yeah, really nothing magically goes away. The service still has to be provided by someone. Things like the backup get done as part of those cloud functions, the applying of patches, etc.
Great. That's basically the last question I have. As I said, we still have a bit of time, so please fire up any last questions that you have. And I just want to point out as well, Bruno, Deborah, who one of the questions you answered before, was just saying thank you because you have confirmed that they were asking the right questions about their current setup and where they need to be heading as they grow larger. So thanks for that. And just a note from Janine for everyone that she just put a mention here that before anyone signs up with Amazon, they might want to check out some of the issues publishers have faced when trying to negotiate deals with them. So it's good to do some research beforehand, obviously.
Absolutely, and I'd support the thought that Janine's put there. It really is about informing yourselves, and that's very much about what the drive of our presentation's about. Because we find that, cloud's not going to go away. Cloud will be ubiquitous in 5 to 10 years' time. It'll be everywhere. But at the moment, it's still very vendor, still very technology-driven, and people can just get excited and go aboard because, it works. But it's important that as it drops down from the big players to sectors such as not-for-profit, that you guys, do the responsible thing as business representatives and think about, well, what do we need in our business? Is the cloud service the right fit for us right now? So I definitely endorse that thought, that comment there from Janine.
Yeah, while we're on that note, I mean, I understand that cloud is a new thing and everyone's excited about it, but there are lots of concerns about risks and a lot of questions, how do we start? So for everyone who has attended today, I will be sending a link to the recording of the session as well as the slides, and also a link to fill out the evaluation form for the webinar. And if you can please write down in the evaluation form if there are specific things about cloud that you would like to know more about, because next year, one of the topics that we will talk about in a particular month is cloud, so there will be a lot of content and events on cloud for you. So it will really help us to develop the presentation and the session content in terms of what exactly do you need so we can deliver the right information for you. So please make sure you write that down in the evaluation form as when you do get the link. Okay, here we have a question coming up from Ray Wynn. They have 30 different sites that currently access their server via a remote desktop system. They think that cloud offers them a good alternative for most of their sites, but some may have limited data speed. Do they need to wait until all have good data speed before moving?
Gosh, it's a tough question to answer straight away like that. You'd have to. It'd come down to what the services that you're offering, what the usage of that service is from the sites that have the poor connection, and whether users could tolerate any kind of impact that moving to the cloud would have. So I'm sorry I can't give you a straightforward yes or no. But it's really, gather a bit more data, gather a bit more facts, ask a few more questions, and that'll help you, I think, come up with the right advice. And even if you don't know all the answers yourself, which you're not expected to, they're really things you should put back to your technology providers, to people that are trying to potentially upsell you on cloud. They're the kind of questions that will make the service, a success or a bit of a fizzer in your organisation, and we encourage you to sort of ask those questions of the providers.
One question here from Tim. What happens, and this is, I think, is a really valid, good question. What happens if your data is stored overseas, where they may have different laws about IT matters, i.e. security? Does the provider look after this aspect, and what sort of guarantee can they give to deliver on this aspect? Is there any international standard available?
I don't believe there is. There is a number of initiatives that are still in the early stages of best practice kind of forums amongst a lot of the cloud providers and data centers that host the cloud services. But basically, coming back to that point we raised about data sovereignty, there is, if push came to shove, there is the potential risk that if your data was being provided by a cloud service provider that had the data center physically hosted in a different country, there is the potential that you may not be able to go and just retrieve everything you wanted to as if you had it sitting here in Australia. So that's one of the things that we'd encourage you to, if you've got a cloud provider that's got a great business case and everything stacks up but they're offshore, we'd encourage you to work through the specifics of, well, these are our requirements, get appropriate advice to help you get the right answer. So it is currently a bit of an area that's being worked through, as I mentioned, to try to come up with some kind of international code of conduct or baseline. But ultimately, yeah, it's just like Australia would if there was something sitting in Australia and Australia felt it was in our interest to protect a particular piece of data or whatever the asset might be, the Australian government would use its own priorities as being the most important thing. That's exactly how another sovereign is going to act with an asset being the data and data centre that's sitting under their jurisdiction. So as a purely worst case, it might be unlikely, but as a purely worst case, that's the way these things would likely play out.
Narissa was just asking, you did mention earlier about Dropbox, and I wasn't sure if she was there, but would you recommend Dropbox as a reputable option for cloud computing?
Oh, look, it's definitely reputable. They started as very much a consumer type of product. They have, just recently have put a lot of effort in and evolving it to more corporate or enterprise grade. So they're not a fly-by-night organisation. It comes down to, I suppose, again, what are you going to put out there, and are your business sort of rules and business requirements sort of fairly clear, and use that to make your assessment. But yeah, they're a reputable organisation.
Great. Well, that's the last of the questions. Thank you very much, Bruno, for your time and for your presentation. I trust that it helped a lot for everyone here who's curious and is interested in moving to the cloud. And I really hope that that gave you some basic understanding and basic knowledge in terms of where to go from now, and just the basic, especially the key questions and considerations that you need to think about before going through. As I mentioned, it will really help for us to develop our content for the cloud next year. So please do let me know what other topics in terms of cloud would you like to know more about, risk, security, and then we can cover them in more detail next year. On that note, thanks everyone for attending, and I hope you get the rest of you enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks, Bruno.
Yep, thanks very much. You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.